three of us are doing a panel presentation today. And so we're each going to talk about 15 minutes because we want to leave time at the end for questions or comments for any of us. So we don't have a microphone. I think we can all project, but if you can't hear, just kind of raise your hand and we'll speak up. So my name is Emily Farber. I'm one of the two social workers at Avenidas, Paula Wolfson, who is on the mic this morning, and myself. And in the short time that I do have today, I printed out, so mine are the colorful handouts that you should have. And I want to go through, this session is about navigating, resources for more care. And so the three of us are going to speak about different components of what that might look like. The first sheet, the caregiver checklist, I have to say I use for almost every presentation I give, no matter the topic. And so I brought it today because I think it can be a great roadmap when you are in a caregiving situation, no matter where you're at. I think that I often see people's minds just swirling about with the to-do list for today, for next week, for 3 years from now. And so I really like this checklist where I gather this from a variety of sources. And the questions at the top are, what kind of care does the person need now? How might that change? Who's going to be part of my caregiving team? And that can be a whole lot of, that can look very different. We have families who are now spread out all over the country, all over the world, but starting to think about what roles different people might play. So if you are living in Palo Alto and the adult child is in New York, obviously they can't be going to doctor's appointments, but are there other roles and responsibilities that they can take on? What is the person's preference? What is the wishes? Starting with that, might not always be able to attain everything. And then what are the concerns and fears? And so these types of questions, again, just medical, legal, financial, transportation, and then again, these very little and big things. Things like, does anyone have extra keys to the house? If we rush out to an emergency, again, how am I going to finance long-term care? So I just wanted to provide this. This is for proactive planning. Some of this you may look at and say, okay, I have some of, a lot of this covered, and oh, these are the areas that, I need to work on. And so what I'm covering as part of resources, community resources, are two things today. So the blue sheet, the blue handout, is about Avenidas care partners, but also more generally, geriatric case management. And so if I'm actually going to have you, if you look at the second page of the blue one, the geriatric care management, I got this information. I don't know if any of you are familiar. There was an organization, the National Professional Geriatric Case Management. And in the last maybe 5-10 years, they were kind of branding, and professionals were but part of geriatric case management or care management. Has anyone, just show of hands, heard of that before? Okay. Some people have, some people say yes, but I don't know, what does that mean? It's not as clear-cut as doctor or driver or, so what is a geriatric care manager? And actually this professional group, just to make things more confusing, switched about a year ago to aging life care professionals. Don't want you to get caught up in the lingo, but why I copied this information, I'm not going to read through it, but why I wanted you to have this is so you can get a sense of when might it be helpful to have a geriatric case manager and what that would look like. And so these types of professionals, and Avenidas is part of that, can help with whether or not you have a lot of people on your informal support team, or it's just you, or maybe one other person. I often tell people that as my parents and other loved ones get older, I'm not going to be the geriatric case manager for my parents. We're going to get another geriatric case manager, because oftentimes, it can be helpful to have that outside person to help facilitate conversations, to be a fresh set of eyes that's not caught up in the day-to-day, that can help navigate, differing of opinions between adult children, spouses, all of that. And so what I liked about this sheet that I copied from their website is the different areas of expertise. And so you are often the expertise certainly on yourself, and maybe on your partner, or on your parent, or on someone you've been caring for. But that doesn't mean you can navigate all the different legal, financial systems, long-term care. And so what a geriatric case manager, a social worker professional can help you with is navigating medical systems, so going into the hospital, going into the emergency room, doctor's appointments. I know many people have now 4 or 5 different doctors that they see. Maybe their prescriptions are double digits, so helping with that. The financial piece, housing and residential care options, local resources, crisis intervention, advocacy, public benefits, all of that. And it's going to be different depending on your situation. And what's also great is when you can work with someone over time. So you may meet with a case manager, a social worker, and you have a snapshot of what's going on now. You put some services and resources in place, and in 6 months, it's a different picture. And in 6 months after that, it's a different picture. And so to have someone to work with you as things change can be critical. And on the back here, it says, why might you need someone like this? Someone says, well, what do I need a social worker for? Or what, we're doing pretty well on our own. And it's true, in this area especially, the older adults and the families that I work with are incredibly bright and talented and have, a lot of connections to resources. Like I said, they're just inundated with too much. And so if the person you're caring for has multiple health or mental health issues, or maybe a new diagnosis, if you're worried about the safety of them living in the environment, if they need help with financial and legal. And as I said, I would say even in the 5 years I've been at Avenidas, we are getting more and more phone calls, consults, emails about this long distance caregiving. About the person is in Palo Alto, they're all over the country, or we meet with adult children who are in the Bay Area that they're, family members in Oregon or in Florida. And so how to do all of that. And so it can be very flexible in terms of what that looks like. So a lot of times, Paula, myself, will meet with the older adults and the family for maybe a few times, put a plan in place, and then like I said, things are quiet for a while, kind of on their way, and then maybe you circle back. Some people, especially if the individual is alone, like let's say the family is spread out all over, and so you really need more of a hands-on person. This is where, outside of Avenidas Care Partners, where a professional, aging life professional, geriatric care manager, whatever you want to call it, there are individuals and organizations that do more of the around the clock, that have a cell phone, that have a pager, that can drive your loved one to appointments, that can be there. And they often bill, by the hour, every 15 minutes, however that works. But that kind of more intensive case management, we don't provide at Avenidas, but it can be needed if, like I said, if the person is pretty isolated on their own. At Avenidas, we are available during the week, and the front page here, it just captures kind of what we do, like I said, why you may want to utilize the services and have that support. And sometimes we act as the point person. Someone called me the quarterback once, I don't know, but the coach that, again, we're not elder law attorneys, of course, we're not medical professionals, but can kind of be that point person of connecting you with all of that and helping you. And we often meet with people when they're at a transition point. Again, whether that's a new diagnosis, or there was a fall, or someone who's moving away that used to be that support. We certainly do crisis intervention, although I would say as much as possible, if you can come when there's maybe a change, but you're just looking ahead, obviously it's better to go at it in a more proactive way. And in my last 5 minutes here, I would say a very large, what I get phone calls about and what I make referrals to is home care agencies and private duty home care. And so I want to spend just a few minutes talking about that. At Avenidas, we don't provide the home care, but again, we refer out quite a bit. And one sheet that I hand out that families say are one of the most helpful things is the purple sheet here, which is questions to ask when you're hiring an agency. Because, again, this is new territory, so let's say you have a list of, you meet with some of the sponsors here today, you take their brochures, you have 5 agencies and names, and how do I choose one or the other? And so what I like is this sheet has a list of questions. You don't have to, of course, ask all of them, but to do some of the comparing and contrasting between agencies. And I say, even if you like the first one you talk to, call 2 more and do some of this comparing. A question I get quite a bit about home care is about payments and how is that covered by anything. And Medicare, unfortunately, does not pay for this private duty home care. We'll talk about home health and other services today that can be covered, but a home care agency, Medicare, your supplemental insurance, Medi-Cal is not covered. If you have a private long-term care insurance policy, that's when this can kick in. But otherwise, it's private pay. And home care can just be such a wide-ranging service. And it can be help with the personal cares, with getting dressed, shower assistance, meal preparation, laundry. It can be companionship. It can be driving to errands or doctor's appointments. And so when you're starting with a home care agency, you would meet with a person from that agency. They have different titles, but often it's called a client care manager, or again, or case manager. And it's not the individual that will be providing the care, but it's their supervisor that will meet with you and your loved one and say, what do you need? What is this going to look like? Are there certain tasks that you want done, that are once a month, as needed, certain things that should happen every day? And home care can be anything from 1 shift every other week. I have someone right now that, like I said, 1 day every other week. They're just kind of putting their toes in the water. They have someone come in and do a whole list of tasks, changing the bed sheets, going for a walk with them, preparing some meals and putting them in the freezer, to every day or around-the-clock care. And so today all 3 of us are talking about resources that are bringing you into the home. There's certainly a tipping point, whether it's financial or safety and health, where it may make sense to move to a senior living community. And a social worker, a geriatric case manager, we work with families when that time does come. But today we really want to highlight there are so many different resources that you can bring into the home. And I have clients from age 64 to 98. And right now, all of my caseload, my clients say they want to stay in their home. And so I say, okay, so how do we make that happen? And so it's often by bringing in, a point person, a coach, a geriatric case manager, bringing in home care of some level. We provide referrals and help accessing transportation. that can be a huge transition, tipping point when someone gives up their keys. And so this is one component. I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Melissa. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll have time for questions for all of us. But thanks.
So I'm Melissa Fischer. I'm with NurseRegistry. I'm the COO. I'm also a nurse. I've been with NurseRegistry for about 5 years. I was also the primary caregiver for my grandmother from the time she was 91 until she was 99. So this is a topic that's very near to me and dear to me. So what I want to tell you a little bit about today are not only our services, but how private duty nursing, the tremendous range that it can cover and the wide variety of clients that we service. So we are local. We have our offices just a couple miles away here in downtown Palo Alto, although we do serve the greater Bay Area. We're very lucky to have a lot of nurses in all of the counties that we touch. So we can provide services wherever your level might be in the Bay Area. Private duty nursing, with our nurses, we only have licensed, skilled nurses. So we do not have caregivers on our registry, only RNs and LVNs. And oftentimes the question comes, well, when do I need a nurse, or when do I need a caregiver? Caregiver agencies will go over all of that information with you as well. So if you're just starting the process and aren't quite sure, I haven't seen Emily's list, but I think a lot of the things that they go over with you are medical limitations on what agency caregivers are able to provide in the home. Oftentimes what we do with private nursing is we will supplement caregivers in the home, and again, like Emily says, most of our clients really have a strong desire to stay where they are. So whether that's in their home or even in a facility that maybe they need a little extra medical attention. We have clients who, again, nursing is a very wide spectrum. There are lots of different types of nurses, and there's a lot of different types of nursing. We have clients who need weekly or monthly check-ins, maybe just to do some medication management. As Emily mentioned, oftentimes there's many physicians in the picture. You may have a nephrologist and a neurologist and your cardiologist, and everybody's prescribing medications, and oftentimes these are coming from different places. Again, at least with my grandma, I know I did some of her prescriptions mail order, some of them I would pick up at the pharmacy just for convenience. So there's no cohesion oftentimes. We can have nurses go in simply just to do medication management, where they will go in and reconcile the medication list from different doctors, take a look and say, why are they on these 2 different medications? It doesn't really make sense to me. They can take the step of contacting their doctors. We also have a lot of clients who, again, like Emily said, have their adult children who live out of the area, and they want someone to go in and just make sure that things are still okay. Not only with medication, but with monitoring chronic conditions, whether that's diabetes, whether that's CHF. Oftentimes, these are assessments that can be done in the home. It doesn't need to be a trip to the doctor's office. It doesn't need to be something that becomes more of an inconvenience. We also have clients who reach out to us for very short-term needs. We're coming home from the hospital. We want to make sure that we have a nurse there for the first couple of days to monitor their pain, to see how they're doing, to help with some wound care that maybe the family just isn't comfortable with, or the caregivers aren't technically allowed to do. Oftentimes, people will come out of the hospital with specific wound care instructions or with medication that they're unfamiliar with, or oftentimes even new medical devices. Or I can't tell you how many times we've gotten calls in the evening from people saying, my husband came home and he has a new PEG tube, and they showed me what to do in the hospital, and the home health nurse came out to tell me, but now I'm doing it on my own, and I've just flushed my 3rd batch of meds down the sink because I can't handle it. It's panic mode. Like Emily says, we It's wonderful if you can call us before it reaches panic mode, because it's always easier to plan ahead. But we do pride ourselves on being able to staff those short-term needs. Again, if it's just coming in to reinforce family member teaching, or even caregiver teaching, there are medical things that in-home caregivers are allowed to do, but they need the teaching and they need the reinforcement. When someone comes home from the hospital, they're oftentimes given a certain number of visits that are provided through Medicare, through a home health agency. We are not a home health agency. We are specifically private duty nursing. So again, in those situations where someone has had their home health visits that have been allotted to them, but still feel they need some extra help, that's when we can step in and help. When someone maybe is coming home, and I don't know if anyone has experienced this, but it's happening more and more often, these very precipitous discharges from the hospital. They want you out. And so they may discharge you to a skilled nursing facility, but again, people would much rather convalesce in their homes than a skilled nursing facility. And even things as complicated as IV infusions, antibiotic infusions, they will send you home with that and send you with some reinforcement teaching, but assume that a family member or caregiver will be the one to help provide those medication administrations. We can help fill the gaps. So many times we've had people with adult children who are able to come in and, okay, well, I can do his infusion after work in the evenings, but no one is there to do the infusion in the morning. It's something that's way out of the scope of practice for a paid caregiver, but it's definitely something that a licensed nurse can help with. And if it keeps someone in their home as opposed to being in a skilled nursing facility in that convalescence period, then again, that's something that we're happy to help with. Other areas where we can supplement the care that's already existing is in palliative and hospice care. We have a lot of clients who will have a loved one on hospice, and the hospice organization will have a visiting nurse come out, and maybe the rule will be they have to reach a certain level before they qualify for continuous care through the hospice organization. We are private pay, our nurses work independently. We don't have those kind of rules. If you want a nurse, we will help find you a nurse. It's just that easy. So no matter where they are on that level of care, as long as the family member wants someone there to help provide care, we can do that. And again, it can range from a very low level of skilled nursing that's required to a very high level of skilled nursing that's required. We have clients who are in the home with trachs, with feeding tubes, on home ventilators that need to be monitored overnight, and we are able to match them with private nurses who have the capability and have the skill level to manage those higher level medical needs. Again, on the other side of the spectrum, helping someone fill up their medication boxes and coming in and listening to their lung sounds and making sure that their CHF sounds okay, that their ankles aren't too swollen. Those are things, again, caregivers can monitor weight very closely if someone has CHF and it's something that needs to be checked. But when do they make the call to the physician? When do they make the call to the family and let them know that something is going on? That's a nursing judgment that a nurse can make. The other thing that we have seen that has been wonderful is the continuity of care with our nurses, with their clients. We have had many clients where it might start out with one level of care. I'm thinking of one client, a case study right now that we were just talking about at another meeting earlier this week. It was a client with ALS, so he wasn't an older adult. I think he was in his late 50s. But the nurse had come to help the wife with an antibiotic infusion. He had gotten an infection and was coming home from the hospital, and the wife needed some respite. She had 2 children in the home and a full-time job and needed some help with the infusions. So that's how it began. A couple of visits for a short period of time, as long as those antibiotics went on, and then that was over. The family and the nurse had developed such a good rapport that the wife then called upon the nurse for assessment needs. I don't like the way he's spasming, and I don't want to take him into the doctor. Is it okay if you come out and take a look at him? Can you come and check his lung sounds? He has this pressure ulcer, a bed sore that it's getting very red. Can you come and take a look at it? A nurse can always come out and do an assessment. There's no doctor's orders that are required for that. Of course, if it's an emergent situation, we will never advise you to have a nurse come out if it's something that sounds like it needs to actually be taken care of immediately. But for things like that, to provide peace of mind, eventually the nurse started working longer shifts with this client to provide even more respite for the wife. Even though he didn't have those acute needs, he was no longer on his IV antibiotics, but he still had breathing issues. He still had other care needs that needed to be closely attended to. And then ultimately, she saw him through hospice care as well. So that's just one example of, we've helped over 1,000 families in the Bay Area. We also work with facilities. We also work with private individuals in facilities. So that's another thing that we can work to have nurses in a hospital setting as an advocate for a private patient. We've had clients with very high levels of anxiety going into procedures saying, I'm worried about the night shift. I had a bad experience before where no one was attending to my needs. I want someone there with me who can assess me, who can know what's going on, and report to the nurse on duty. We've had that situation many, many times. Or again, someone who's been in a certain assisted living for a very long time and is very comfortable being there, but they need another level of medical care. Maybe it's a visit for a catheterization, maybe it's a visit for an injection, but we can fill those gaps. We can fill that gray area. And again, it's just a resource of knowing what's there. And again, bumbling through it myself as a caregiver for my grandma. Once you find out that resources are available, luckily she didn't have a high level of medical need, but she had many other needs. And only becoming involved in the industry myself in the last 5 years did I see, oh my gosh, there's people who do that. There's people who will come in and help you. I had no idea. If only I knew there were care managers and I didn't have to do everything. So it's the same thing with skilled medical care. Oftentimes the onus falls on the family because many paid caregivers have to be hands-off for legal reasons. They're just not allowed to attend certain medical needs. And so it ends up being the adult children who come in and help with the wound care and help with the advanced medical needs, but there are resources for that.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
You said it's private pay, but it sounds like some of the things, like an infection that gets started due to inactivity or whatever, could be billed to insurance. Can the family bill and see if their insurance will pay for some of the...
I always encourage families to contact. I have seen many situations where not only would primary medical insurance cover, but also long-term care insurance will cover skilled private nursing sometimes. There are such a range of policies out there that I can never say for sure. I'm not an expert in that, but exactly. We will help the families in that process. I've done it myself personally. We have a lovely finance manager who helps people out. Providing the insurance company with all of the nursing documentation. We will customize our invoicing to list all the things on there that they want to see because it's not something we regularly do. So we are happy to work with families on that, but yes, we are a private family. Yeah.
What are the range of prices for the LVN?
So we are purely on an hourly basis. So regardless of the level of care that's needed, our rates for LVNs is $75 an hour. For an RN is $95 an hour, and there is a 2-hour minimum that applies to both.
Can I ask what's the, why would you have a RN versus an LVN?
So there's a slight difference in the scope of practice. One of the big things comes down to infusion therapy. So people coming home on IV antibiotics, for example, or who need other types of infusion therapies in the home, and LVN cannot do that. An LVN can do all types of wound care, they can do medication management, they can administer medications every route other than into your veins. They can help you take your pills, again, something that paid caregivers aren't allowed to do. But that's the primary thing is infusions. Yes.
What is CHF?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize for jargon. Congestive heart failure. Yes.
Is the organization national?
We are not. We are local. We were, like I said, we're in Palo Alto right now. We have dreams of expanding, but for the moment, we're in the Greater Bay Area.
How do you find the equivalent service in Florida?
You know, I would start with contact looking at case management, and they typically have a range of resources that's available to them. You can also try looking for home health agencies. That's different than what we do. We are specifically a nurse staffing agency. So like I said, we work with facilities as well. Facilities will call us and say, hey, we need a nurse to help. And we'll help anybody.
So if you're looking at a rural community, would you just go online and just see organizations?
I would look,
Under that
Aging
title?
Life Care Association is nationwide. You can probably find, I would start with a care manager because they are a wonderful resource and can help with the right direction. I don't want to encroach too much on Tom's time. We're going to have time for questions after as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll switch gears, yeah. Yeah, why don't we do the rest, if it's okay, we'll do the rest of the questions at the end. We'll have time.
Okay, I'm Tom Pamilla. I'm the director of the Avenidas Kleiner Center, which is right next door, and that's where most of us will be going after this session. Let me start talking about what is an adult, and what adult daycare, and what is adult day health care, and what's the distinction between the two of them. I'd like to talk about the population of folks that we're caring for right now. So you have a picture of these people. Do they resemble the folks that you're caring for? And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the caregiver, you. Okay? And when is it time to think of a day health center? When does it make sense for you and for the person that you're caring for? Okay, Rose Kleiner Center. It has two parts, two phases. One is adult daycare. These are for folks who are not able to be left alone any longer. Could be they're frail, could be a fall hazard, they could have dementia, it could be a wandering issue. It could be that they're isolated. And I know what happens to me when I'm home, let's say I'm sick, and those walls start moving in very quickly. So somebody who's isolated and spends most of his time or her time watching TV or just sitting on the couch, it's deadly. So what we want to do is to provide socialization and other activities for people to keep their mind active. Okay, so that's the daycare. The day health adds the nursing aspect and the therapist aspect. So if someone who comes in, let's say that person has dementia, or let's say that person is blind, or has had a stroke and dealing with the after effects of a stroke. Okay, the nursing obviously watches that person, make sure that as we put a care plan together, that it's focused on that specific person's need. It's not a one-size-fits-all for everybody. We have an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a speech therapist. Now, we don't give speeches like Shakespeare, but what we do is the speech therapist is basically in the lunchroom and saying, okay, how are those muscles working? How is the swallowing working? How should we cook the food so that that person doesn't aspirate or have choking issues? So that's what the speech therapist basically is doing. And also for folks who have had strokes, how are they understood if they can't quite get the words out that are needed or can't quite pronounce it any longer? So a speech therapist will work with that person so that he or she can be better understood and less isolated because of their disability. Okay, so that's the two aspects. Okay, the other two aspects are, what does it do for the participant? What does Rose Kleiner Center do for the caregiver? okay? And I think one of the things that a caregiver needs to do is to do some introspection, okay? How do you feel as you're caring for either a loved one or caring for someone who is in your charge, okay? And the question is basically, do you feel overwhelmed? If this sounds familiar, you can, I would recognize that. If you feel, do you feel that your stress level rising? Do you ever feel angry, even at the person that you really love and are taking care of? Okay. And the reason you want to do that introspection and ask yourself is because if you're stressed, you know, if you're angry, and it happens to all of us, it shows. And if it shows, it communicates. And if it communicates, it has an impact. Okay, so those are the questions you have to ask yourself. What's the best for me? And the big question that you have to ask yourself, if something happened to you as a caregiver, and you are no longer able to be a caregiver, what happens to the person you're caring for? And that's the question you have to answer yourself when you think about a place like the Kleiner Center. Is it time for that? Is it for me? Is it for the person I'm caring for? Those are the questions that you ask. Let me tell you a little bit about the population that we have and a typical day at the Kleiner Center. Like I mentioned, we have people who have basically issues of frailty. They may fall. And there are people there who are 99, 98 years old, very frail. They can tell you everything you wanted to know about World War II, okay? Everything you didn't want to know. And very sharp, very, very charismatic, okay? And there are people there who are blind, so they need guidance, and people have been blind from birth. And it's interesting, some of you may know Anna from here. This is a lady who's been blind from birth. She's about, I would guess about 60 years old. And she comes in, we have lots of music and lots of activities over at Kleiner Center. She plays the piano, makes that piano stand on its head. And she's been blind from birth, you know? So it's amazing what a role model she is and what people can do even though they have some major disability. We try to focus the activities on the ability level of the people, participants in our program. And one funny story that I have is that we had a retired music professor from Stanford who was having dementia, and it was advancing. And like I said, we have lots of music. You know, we have the Beatles, the Mamas and the Papas, you know. He hated it. Right, so we found a room for him. He went in, we put him in the room. I gave him a group of CDs with Stravinsky and The Rite of Spring, and he was in seventh heaven. And he started bringing in the other participants, and he would teach them. Well, that's the cello, and see how the cello comes in right after the bass. So he was in seventh heaven. The people who were teaching loved it, and I went back to the Beatles. So it was well, the point I'm trying to make is we try to focus the program on the needs of the person you're caring for. And what's the benefit for you? Okay, if the person you're caring for spends some of his or her time at the Kleiner Center, well, you have some time for yourself. And how do you spend that time? Maybe you just put your thoughts together, okay? Because if you're constantly caring for somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's a lot of stress. It's very difficult to find the time just to sit down and think. Right? So that's one. Go to the hairdresser maybe. Okay? Maybe take a nap. Okay? So you have time for yourself, basically. And you also have the peace of mind knowing that the person you're caring for, or your loved one, is in a place where the bottom line is respect and dignity for that person. Okay? And basically what we try to do is to build on the strengths that remain for this person. All right? Rather than focus on what the person has lost, Let's focus on what he or she still has, and how can we build on that. Typical day in the center, okay? We come in, look, we have a transportation program. We work with the VTA, Valley Transit, which sometimes is a pain in the neck, but generally, we work with them as well as we can. And I have this wonderful administrative assistant who lives on the phone with these folks and really making sure that they do the best that they can for our folks. So a typical day, they come in from VTA, or sometimes family members bring them in, and we have a light breakfast. So we have tea, coffee, applesauce. In the winter, we'll have hot chocolate, crackers. Just sort of basically sit down, relax after the ride in, take your hat off, pick up the newspaper, talk to your friends, okay, and sort of relax. That lasts for about 20 minutes, a half hour. Then we divide the big room in half. If you come over, I'll show you the big room. So on one side, we have instructors from Fischer College that would come in Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They talk about current events. They'll hold up the newspaper, okay? They'll say, okay, what's today's date? So people can focus, okay? Yeah, today's Saturday, okay? And whatever the date is today. 21st. So people get focused on that. They'll look at the headlines and say, okay, what did you think of the headlines? And it's a conversation, okay? It's not sitting, listening to somebody chatter, and you fall asleep in front of them. What it is a conversation. What do you think about that headline? What happened? On other days, we'll show a travelogue. It could be South Africa or someplace. And invariably, what happens is the instructor will ask, well, have you ever been there? And somebody will raise their hand. Then somebody else will raise their hand. And somebody back there will raise their hand. So that's where the conversation starts. What are you doing? How come I didn't know you? We were in the same town in South Africa. So it's a conversation. It keeps the mind going. It brings back those memories that are there. Okay. Thursdays is one of my favorite days because I don't know if you know this complex here. This Kleiner Center is the first building. This building, the senior center, is the second building, and then after this building is a preschool. Thursday mornings, we bring the munchkins over. Okay. So we have an intergenerational exchange, and the two generations really benefit from the interaction between the two. Grandma, what's your name? And Grandma's going to say, well, what's your name? What do you want to be when you grow up? And they read stories to each other. They back balloons back and forth. They sing together. It's a very comfortable, engaging type of experience for both generations. Some people don't want to be with the children, don't want to do the travel logs or anything. On the other side of the building, they'll do artwork. Okay, it could be doing cards now for the holidays that are coming. It could be art. You see the art hanging all over the room. But it's things focused on them, and they're even. I describe the program aides over there as my saints, and I call them my saints because they're there because they want to be there. It's their profession. It's their passion to help other people. And even the blind get help with the artwork because of the assistance with these folks. Okay? So we have programs throughout the day, lots of music. We have lunch in the middle. And right after lunch, there is a mad rush to the restrooms, and that's where the aides really help. We have LVNs that help, and CNAs and nurses, and it's a wonderful program. And then after lunch, we wait for the Valley Transit to come, and during that time, we have professional musicians that come in, or we have other folks that entertain during the afternoon. So it's a lot of music, very upbeat, very positive, okay? And it's one of those things you have to see to really understand it. I mean, I could say as much as I can that it's a very positive, wonderful place. But if you go in there and you look at the relationship, and I'll tell you my very first story, my very first experience in Rose Kleiner Center. I was there as sort of just looking around before I became the director. And I saw an elderly gentleman and a younger woman walking. part of the building is a very large rectangle. It's like a city block almost. And I saw the two of them walking, and I could not tell, is this an employee and one of our participants? Or is it a dad and his daughter? That was the laughter, the conversation between them, the TLC that you could just feel. And that's what Rose Kleiner Center is. Okay? So I'm kind of out of time, but that's what we do. It's a wonderful program. Please come over and take a look at it. During the week, you're more than welcome to come over, and I'll give you the chef's tour of the place. And it's a wonderful program. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So we have 15 minutes for questions for any of the three of us.
I wanted to answer, it came a little bit after you started talking about the Avenidas care partners. Is that part of Avenidas Village, or is it open, available to any member, like your lifetime members of Avenidas? How does this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Her question was, with Avenidas Care Partners, do you have to be a member, part of the village, all that? So you do not need to be a member. You don't have to live in Palo Alto. There's no membership requirements. On the bottom here, if you are a village member or an Avenidas member, you have a discounted price consultation. But absolutely no affiliation is needed. And like I said, we really have a range of, sometimes we'll meet with a family, a senior once or twice, and that's it. That's enough to get you going, get you connected to all the resources. And sometimes it can be more of a relationship over months or several years. The number here is kind of the intake there.
That you're based at Avenidas Center?
We're based at Avenidas Center, which right now I will say is at Cumberland Community Center. And so we have Avenidas Care Partners, Avenidas Rose Kleiner, which is here. And I do want to say, and we'll take more questions, I want you to think of all of this as, part of your tool belt. I mean, what I know I see quite a bit is the best circumstances. None of this is mutually exclusive. Is having maybe home care services, a nurse, private duty nurse coming in. They also go to Rose Kleiner 3 times a week, and they have several meetings with me or Paula to stay connected. So I just want you to know, like I said, these are all different components.
I don't even know how to ask this question. What is the name of the professional that will go into a house and see if they need ramps, see if they need those special walk-in bathtubs and all that? Is there a profession that does that, who assesses and then also hires and builds the construction? And what's that called?
One of the things we do at Rose Kleiner Center is we have an occupational therapist. We send the occupational therapist out who looks at the bathtub, who looks at the aids that a person needs to prevent falling, looks at is there an extension cord across the room, what kind of cane or walker or wheelchair is that person using, and then advises the family member, okay, these are the things that would make this a lot safer for your family.
But who does the actual construction? Is there a specialty construction industry that goes in that knows how to build all these things and installs them?
Yeah.
Yes, there are organizations.
What's it called? What would I look for?
There are many of them. What I would look for, I would just go on Google and say, okay, in my area, what are the organizations that provide grab bars?
Center for Independent Living.
Center for Independent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's what the county services are called around here. I don't know why Florida would call them anything different.
There's, thank you. And like Tom said, it's usually an occupational therapist, even the private agencies. There's a wonderful program through Stanford, if you want to be affiliated, that's called Farewell to Falls. And again, that's an occupational therapist doing the assessment at Rose Kleiner. If I was coming out, I'd be partnering with an occupational therapist. There's one company, I will say 2 things. Avenidas has a handyman services. So often if an occupational therapist says you could use 2 grab bars by the toilet, 1 in the shower, you know, a few other things. We have a handyman services, but I agree with Tom that, or, you know, if you're looking at other counties or states, I would say, I do want to say when you're looking, when you're saying, we get that question, how do you find an Avenidas or NurseRegistry or whomever in, you know, again, Boston, LA, wherever. Throughout the country, you can look up the Area Agency on Aging, and that's often a good, again, at least start. Because a lot of times, Avenidas, for example, happens to be, we're also the senior center, but a lot of senior centers are more programs and activities. So I think just if you have a loved one in another city, county, or state, looking for the Area Agency on Aging, then they would have referrals to the day programs, to the nurses, to all of that.
Avenidas, as a membership, to help people stay in their homes, is under a type of organization. What is that called? I always forget the name of it.
The Avenidas Village?
Yeah, it's a village, so what do they call it nationwide? It's something.
It's villages, so if you can look up.
Senior villages, or if you were Googling it, what would you put in the search box?
I think the Village Project or similar Village.
That's how it started.
I know there was a question up here.
If the registry nurse provides a service like palliative care or hospice care, which is covered by Medicare, who submits the request to Medicare for reimbursement?
Well, Medicare will usually have their own providers that you have to go through for the primary Medicare coverage. There are supplemental insurance, you know, outside of Medicare or long-term care insurance that might cover private duty nursing, but we, like I said, we kind of function in that we're a companion to whatever Medicare is already providing. So we are not a home health agency, we are not a Medicare covered hospice agency. We don't fit into that box, we support that box.
Your nurse is in contact with the primary physician of the surgery?
Absolutely, dependent upon the situation, there's always a primary point of contact. So whether that's the physician, whether that's the adult child, whether that's the hospice organization, again, it ranges so greatly that it's whatever the needs of the client are.
With your program, how early does it begin in the daytime if you're bringing a person to you?
It's a good question. What time does the program at Avenidas Most Kleiner begin? Normally, it's from about 8 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon. Some folks, there's one lady that, because of the dementia, we sent the Valley Transit to pick her up. She's already lost patience waiting, so she walks to the place, and so she could be banging on the door 1/4 to 8. But we're there. And, you know, she has her cup of tea, and she's happy. And it's interesting with dementia. The thing that she wants to get there because she wants, in her mind, she's an employee, and she wants to be able to fold all of the towels. So she folds the towels. Right, but it's basically 8 o'clock to 2:30.
Does the program start at 8, or that's when they would get picked up from the transportation?
No, they would be there by about 8, between 8 and 8:30. And then they have their breakfast, and then we get started from there. Okay?
What other questions?
Regarding institutional long-term care insurance, because somewhere I read that above 80 by and large they don't give, and then above 70 to 80 if you have diabetes and 60 you don't get insurance. So any information where you can get long-term care insurance?
I don't know, I agree with Melissa. I mean, it's so individualized, and the plans can vary so much between, like,
Where was the information?
Information on the actual policies?
Yes.
Oh my God, there's a woman.
Table right
a
in the
table.
hallway here.
Mhm.
She's a broker of a lot of policies.
one of the sponsor tables, so during the lunch hour.
Yeah, I forgot her name.
Okay.
On the other hand,
What other questions or thoughts do you have, things that you've seen?
If you have clients at the Kleiner Center, is there transportation to go to classes either at Mountain View Senior Center or other Avenidas classes that people are taking?
The transportation that we have is only from home to Rose Kleiner and back. Okay, it's not, that's what. And the reason for that is that we, as part of the participation of Rose Kleiner, we pay for the BTA, so we make the deposit for each person every month. So we want basically that to be used back and forth.
And what is the cost? Is it variable depending on needs or?
For Rose Kleiner Center, it's not dependent on age, it's depending, well, first of all, Medi-Cal would pay for it normally. Long-term care insurance may pay for it. The Veterans Association for qualified veterans would pay for 2 or 3 days, a veteran or somebody related to a veteran. If it's private pay, it depends on income and assets, okay? It does not count the house, thankfully. And includes everything, the nursing, the therapy, all that stuff. It's $90 is a low rate, $130 is the mid rate, and $150 per day, okay? And there's a 2-day minimum during the week, and some people come 2, some people come all 5, it depends, okay?
Any other questions?
So much useful information. I've come to this event multiple times, and I've always learned new things. Thank you so much.
And, again, glad you're all here. We'll all stick around for a few minutes if you want to come up and talk. And at one of the caregiver conferences that I was at, one of the speakers was talking about, the analogy, they were just saying, we're so glad you're here and taking the day, because that can be difficult. And all of these services and supports are, for the person you're caring for. But the speaker was saying, think about when you're on an airplane and you're getting that safety talk, and they're saying, if in case of emergency, secure your own face mask before assisting others. And the speaker was saying, think about caregiving like that. That we're so often so focused on the person and what they need, and their own, health and mental health, and the relationships can falter. So I love that. So I've continued to use that as for caregivers, that it's important to secure your own mask. But what that can be is obtaining these resources and not going at it alone, and getting help and support.
I'd just like to add on to that. One of the other things that Rose Kleiner Center offers for the caregiver is a support group. And it's so frustrating sometimes to be able to try to explain what you're going through, and the person you're talking to hasn't the foggiest idea what you're talking about. Or they have wonderful ideas of how you should be doing, The support group, you're talking to folks who understand what you're talking about. They've been in the same situation. There's a wealth of knowledge there that you can receive and that you can offer. So that's another advantage of getting involved. And you don't have to have a loved one or someone as a participant in Rose Kleiner Center in order to be part of the support group. The only thing you have to do is put up with me.
Any last comments or anything?
No.
What time of day does that happen?
The
When
support
is the
group,
support?
it's every Friday at 11 o'clock, 11 to 12. You're more than welcome.
And so right now we have lunch served out on the patio. At 1 o'clock, everyone, the attendees, the staff, we are walking next door over to Rose Kleiner, and we're going to have the programming there this afternoon. So have a good lunch break. Enjoy the sunshine. I don't know if it's warm enough to eat outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you.